much do your parents know about you? It's probably more than their parents knew about them. Welcome to today's episode of Teen Talk. I'm your host, Adelaide. Teen Talk is a project of Tri-City Collective. It's a series of conversations on important issues and topics that matter to teenagers. Providing a voice and platform for the often voiceless is at the heart of this series. We're talking about privacy and parental rights today at All Souls Church. Our panelists today will be Margaret, a freshman and member of the Youth Services Tulsa Youth Advisory Board and their school's drama program. They want to spend their life making a difference in communities they care about. Mason, a sophomore at Addison. He's on this panel to bring attention to legal privacy. And Cassius, born and raised in Tulsa and a sophomore in high school. He's heavily active in community organizations and owns a local recycling company. So today we're going to be talking about privacy. Where does the boundary lie between a parent's right to know about their child and a child's right to privacy? 39% of parents use parental controls, and 61% check which websites their teens visit. How much do you feel like you are monitored?
Much less than I... Well, do you want to go?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry. I'm monitored much less than I was. My parents used to have, Bark and Life 360 and, all of these different things to make sure they knew what I was doing when I was doing it 24/7. But as I've gotten older, the monitoring has switched to other fields, like my friends and where I go, and it's less so about internet now.
Yeah, I'd say I'm monitored a kind of moderate amount. I'm not too monitored. Stuff that I send to my friends isn't really monitored, but maybe when I go to hang out with my friends, where I am, who I'm with, all that kind of stuff is monitored, and my internet is monitored to an extent. So I wouldn't say I'm too over monitored, but I'm not under monitored either.
Yeah. I used to also be a lot more monitored. I had a camera in every room except bathrooms, laws and stuff. Cameras in every room. I had my location tracked. I had my own health and heart rate track just from the watches I would wear and stuff. My parents had to know everything I did, but I've grown a lot more past that. So now I'm really just monitored about my location.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk a little bit more specifically about something all of you mentioned, internet privacy. How much, realistically speaking, do you think parents should monitor their kids' internet use?
What are we defining as kids here? What age?
Teens.
Okay. I would say yes, just from the average period of from 12 to say, I would give a rough 15, 16, depending on their emotional maturity. But I would say the best, you should be tracking most of everything at that time of their lives. Their internet access, their hours of usage, what sites they go to. But I don't know, how do I say this? One of you jump in for me.
Actually, I was about to jump in off of something you were going to say, or something you had said. I think monitoring internet time spent on the internet is as important, if not more important, than monitoring actually where you go. Because, internet addiction is a real problem amongst youth right now. I say that as if I'm not someone who has an internet addiction. I spend forever scrolling on my phone. And that's a problem. It prevents me from doing things. And I think it would be really useful if parents spent time teaching their children about why over usage of internet is damaging and harmful, and what is good internet usage versus what is bad internet usage.
I'd say there's a fine line between monitoring and I guess restricting. So I feel like kids should be monitored on what kind of websites they go to, how long they spend on their phones. But I feel like restricting them on all that kind of stuff, it's subjective to the kid or the teen who it applies to. But I feel like to an extent, monitoring is really good. It's really beneficial for the kid. But over monitoring starts to create problems, and under monitoring starts to create problems too. I do think that spending a lot of time on the internet is a really big and constantly growing problem. Some random weeks I'll find 14-hour screen time, and I'm like, whoa, there's I did not think I spent that long on my phone, because it just flies by when you don't realize how much time you're really on your phone until you like look at it from a different perspective. Like 14 hours a day on your phone is bad. And it's like, you could just scroll forever on TikTok. There's not any like, I mean, they don't try to restrict how long you spend on their apps. No social media does that. So I think that's up to like parents and kids and such.
You mentioned good versus bad internet usage, Margaret. How would each of you define that? Does that mean something to you?
Oh God. I think like sorry. Bad internet usage is over usage, but it's also like what you interact with. Because there are really toxic corners of the internet and communities in the internet that are just kind of harmful. Like the incel community. That's just not to bring that up first thing, but that's sort of a harmful community to get into, especially as something I have so much experience in, a young teenage boy. But no, that's such a harmful community. And other communities like that are even worse. And that push really harmful ideas and stereotypes about other communities and about what you're supposed to be as a person. But yeah, overusage and the types of places you go on the internet is what I categorize as bad internet usage.
I'd like to add one more thing to that category. So yeah, it's bad corners of the internet. Your statement left my mind. Say it again, please.
Like bad versus good, and bad is like overusage, and bad communities, like communities that push stereotypes.
Yes, there are bad communities, overusage especially, but bad communities. So there are places that are like anyone can access, not age limited, but there is just some misinformed people on the internet. It's like, let's say Reddit, for example. Reddit is notoriously bad. Anybody can get on this, and anybody can read literally any quote, any comment, or anything. But I would say it's not necessarily the community that's bad. It depends on the person and if they can just believe it based on, like, some people just read what's on the internet and they'll immediately believe it. That is what makes that community bad. It's the only danger comes from believing something that isn't true. So you can say something on the internet and that person can be misinformed. But if you know that it's wrong, then that's not a dangerous community because you can walk around it.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I just mean like as teenagers who are impressionable and who are looking for people like them or people who they want to aspire to be. Like it can be dangerous to scroll across those parts of the internet when you don't know any better.
I'd also like to add to that category. I feel like on top of misinformation, there's also kind of bias things because like Mason was saying, a lot of kids kind of go off their first impression. So like if they hear something first, that's what they'll stick with and they'll believe with it. And then I would also like to add like sort of addictive corners of the internet. Like social media could be considered addictive. I mean, TikTok is considered addictive, Instagram addictive. Pretty much every single social media gets addictive. And then there's also like corners like parts of the dark web. All of the dark web is pretty much a bad corner that you don't want to be on. And yeah, I'd add that to the category of kind of bad internet.
I mean, I'd say once your kid is on the dark web, there's not much you can do. Like they can find a way around anything you do. But I would like to say, so like with those groups you guys are talking about, those toxic influences, how would you say that parents protect their kids from those groups, especially considering like your average 30-year-old is not going to be able to identify what is a bad internet group, or your average 40-year-old or 50-year-old even?
I think, like, of course, I'm not a parent, but I think that the best thing that you can do is, like, if you see your child start talking about these beliefs or stereotypes or biases, just sitting down like, oh, where did you hear that? Who told you that? And also saying like, oh, well, I heard this, or I think this is true. And not, because it's not really the child's fault, that they've stumbled across this. It's just something that happened. And like, I've been fed misinformation on the internet. I think everyone has. It's just something that you have to be educated about. I know I'm constantly bringing that up, but it really is.
I would say don't just like watch for the behavior of that child. You have to be preemptive. You have to warn them before they go on the internet that they're going to find this information. Like, let's just elections. Let's go with elections, just because there is so much information and so many different opinions. Then they'll pick one and they'll categorize it. They're internalize it as theirs. You should be preemptive and just tell them they're going to find a lot on the internet, and don't just believe it, just to ask about it rather than watch for it to happen.
Mm-hmm. That is very interesting. So you're saying that you need to both dissuade and prevent. You need to do both. It's interesting. Okay, so how would you say your own experience has affected those answers? I know you've mentioned being fed misinformation. Have the rest of you had interactions with toxic groups like the ones you're describing?
I feel like he wants to say something.
Yeah, it seems like one of
So
us
back on the topic of Reddit. Yes, have been fed plenty of misinformation. Have been had people commenting things that, like, so I'll find like a Reddit thread. Like, I'm part of like the most innocent communities ever. Like, we're just talking about like fandoms like Five Nights at Freddy's or Ninjago. People will have an opinion and they will force that opinion down your throat in your digestive and have it come right back out.
That is a vivid description.
You're welcome. Repeat the question. I got off track.
So could you tell us a little bit about your experiences with these groups? And can you tell us like what teens could do to recognize these groups and avoid them?
So yeah, they'll shove an opinion down your throat. As recognizing these, you just kind of have to like, you have to have two mindsets at once. You have to like, don't stop yourself from engaging just by thinking that everything is going to come back at you or it's going to be a negative experience. But you have to be, once that experience happens, you have to be in the same mindset that you'll notice it and you'll just back out of it. The really only thing you can't prevent that the only way to prevent that is just by not engaging at all. And I would say that's just a bad thing. So you just have to be able to notice when an experience is happening.
And I'd like to say that when like, okay, because like when I'm researching a topic that may involve bias or may involve an opinion, sort of, I don't limit myself. I walk in with an open mind. I don't limit myself to just one side's knowledge. Like, I listen to both sides and I formulate an opinion based off of that. That's something I personally do to prevent falling into a sort of like trap where it's like you're only fed one side of information and that's all you believe. And then like if you're only fed that one side, they'll start like kind of diminishing the other side. So you're less likely to believe the other side. And you kind of just take that other side's opinions and that's like all you believe, and you believe it with a passion. So I personally prevent it by just coming in with an open mind and learning about both perspectives.
Yeah, and this is sort of going off of what Cassius just said. Like, you know, PSA, every single person you ever meet ever is going to have different opinions than you. So you need to know how to deal with someone if they have like drastically different without like putting yourself in a situation where you're compromising on your own opinions or even your own morals in some cases. And like, you should never be in the position, even not just on the internet, like ever, where you feel like you're closing off something that you believe in because someone else makes a convincing argument. Like, you always should research things for yourself and make your own decisions.
Thank you for sharing those stories. I think I'd like to move on a little bit to physical location, the other main area you guys mentioned when you were discussing how you were monitored. How much of the time do your parents know where you are?
So, you want to go?
Yeah.
All right. So, for like, I'm an iPhone user. Okay, I prefer Samsung. I'm an iPhone user. As a kid, part of a family plan, your location is shared at all times, but they're not like alerted to your location. They have to look for where you are. Like, there's app like Find My iPhone or something. We use that, for instance. They're not going to know where you are. They're only going to look if they want to know. So it's based on how much they trust you. So I'm not like always known where I am, like, unless they're using like common sense and they know it's like 8 a.m. So I'm obviously at school. So they can know where I am if they want to, but if not, they're not alerted to it.
Yeah, I'd say that I'm also an iPhone user, so my parents know where I am all the time through Find My iPhone. I used to have Life 360 instead of like Find My iPhone, but like I'd say, yeah, they know where I am all the time. That's not necessarily a bad thing. They don't like I usually tell them where I am, so it doesn't really make a difference as long as you're like in a place where you're not supposed to be or that you didn't tell them where you're going. Which that's just never happened to me before, not at least from personal experience.
And like I still am on Life 360 with my family. And again, I don't see it as a negative thing because like I also have a separate Life 360 family of my friends. And it's a little it's a little comforting to be able to know that where my family is and where the people I care about are. And like Life 360 does alert you if like you leave the house or if you arrive at school. And that's good to know for me because I do a lot of after school activities. So if like it's, 7:30 at night and I want to get home, I can look at Life 360 to see how far away my family is and to see like if I can leave now or if I should wait a little bit. And that's super helpful. And it's also just a comfort thing because I can know if something immediately, I can know if something happens to them. And that goes for my friends. Like I can know if there's a problem and I can be more interactive with them.
I'd like to add to that I'm not as concerned about like my family tracking me, more as like the actual app itself tracking me.
Mhm.
Like the people, like I deleted Life 360 because they sell their location data to third parties who I have no idea who they even are. Yeah, Axion was one of them. That's the biggest data handling company in the entire world. And they give you like the exact down to the exact coordinates. So like I remember I don't have Snapchat anymore, but I used to have Snapchat, and I remember like if you request your data from Snapchat, it'll send you it in an email and then like a JSON file, which is like, and it formats all of the data even down to the snap map data. So I basically saw like what date, time, and exact like timestamp and exact coordinates I was at a specific location, like all the way back like 2 years. So it's like a crazy long list, and like anyone in the world can have that data as long as they want to buy it,
Yeah. Also on that thing, if everybody, major companies knowing your stuff, Google's a big person in that area. So Google owns like a lot of stuff. They own like Sheets, they own freaking Google Maps. They also own YouTube. And for that matter, YouTube has archives. Google Maps, they know your location. Google Maps can share that with its other, I don't know, what's sub companies, I guess, if that's a word.
Subsidiaries.
Subsidiaries, yeah. Shares with the subsidiaries. So if somebody wants to make a YouTube video, needs to get into the YouTube archives, they can also know your location just because it's owned by Google.
Google does a lot of that to evade. So usually in foreign countries, usually in like the European Union, they have heavier restrictions on data privacy, and Google evades that because they're not selling to a third party, they're selling to a company that they also own. So it's technically part of them. They're not moving the data outside of the company, but they're still profiting and selling your data to another entity.
Yeah, and people just, it's hard because people just trust because you use Google almost every day. You don't even think whether you can trust or not because like that's the first thing you're going to get on. So just don't always trust the first thing.
Yeah. Now here's a related question. You don't have to answer this if your parents are watching the podcast. Has having these location apps ever prevented you from going somewhere, or has it ever encouraged you to maybe leave your phone behind in order to go somewhere?
No, I've never. Well, I feel like having my phone on me is more of a sense of security. I've just never wanted to leave it anywhere else. But I mean, more than that, I just haven't really seen a need to. I mean, again, I'm not like actively out like in places that I shouldn't be or that my parents don't want me to be. My parents know where I am. Like 99.99% of the time, I'll tell them, oh, I'm at Jonah's house. Oh, I'm at my friend's house. Oh, I'm going to be at this building at this specific time and I need picked up there because I can't drive yet. So, they have to pick me up. So they know, like where to pick me up at, all that kind of stuff. It's never been enough of an issue for me to like leave my phone behind or anything.
I've had to before. I used to have like a different living situation with different people. So I would have like, if something bad was happening at house, I would like leave, but I'd have to leave my location behind. Just like I had a watch that tracked everything. I mentioned that before. Health, my heart rate was reported, everything. So I would leave that because it also tracked my location. So I'd leave that and I would just go to like a nearby park or something because I wouldn't be allowed without like a parent or something. Even if both of them were like fighting or arguing, I would need a safe place to go. I would have to leave that behind so that I could be able to.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had to do that, but I think part of the reason why I've never had to do that is my family and my parents have always been really not insistent's not the right word, but really good at building a relationship where like I trust my parents and I know that if I say to them like, "Hey, I need a second. I'm just gonna walk around." They wouldn't question it. They'd just be like, "Okay, come back by whatever." So I've never had to do that. But I know people who have, and they're not necessarily doing something wrong. They're doing something they don't want their parents, or they don't feel comfortable with their parents knowing that they're doing for their own safety. And but I luckily have never been in that position, just because my parents, as long as I'm safe, they don't care.
Yeah, I'd say part of the reason I've had the experience that I have had is because of the family I was raised in.
Mhm.
We have I have kind of like a mutual trust built with my family that like I trust whatever they're restricting me on is for my own benefit, and in return I kind of they trust to let me go. They trust me enough to let me go to, you know, my friend's house or anything like that. Uh, Not whenever I want, but most of the time they'll say yes.
Mainly what you guys are saying is that you feel that it's more a question of the parents than it is the children, and
Yeah.
whether or not children feel safe, like with their parents tracking their location. Mm-hmm. Let's move on to another area that's important in children's lives: the school. How much of a child's behavior at school do you think should be reported?
So we all have some interesting stuff for this. Okay, so reported by who exactly? Teacher, student, anything?
Well, if the student is reporting it themselves, I feel like that's probably a non-issue. So let's go with the teachers and other faculty.
Okay, the main points where they should be obligated to share this information with, let's say your parent, for instance, is just, I would say only if it like is going to bring, if it is going to bring immediate harm to the student themselves or the student's family. Or like, okay, let's say for instance, your child got into a fight. That parent now wants to sue your child, because that can happen. It almost happened to me. The parent wants to sue that child. The teacher will be obligated to bring that up to your parent, because that child is most likely going to be too scared to. Or if the teacher's job depends on it, like let's say a student came to the teacher because they couldn't share it with anybody else, that teacher's job is on the line because you did this. I'm not saying you shouldn't be sharing that, because you do need somebody, but the teacher is kind of obligated to share so that they can save their job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say there are some stuff that can kind of go like, I think it's more up to the teacher. There's some stuff that like the parents might want reported, like, you know, if their students' grades are dropping. And then there are some parents who are like really strict about whether people like want to change their name or have a different name preference, all of that stuff. And the parents request that the teacher report if the student wants to change their name. And I mean, even now in Oklahoma, there are some laws where, you know, teachers do have to report whether a student wants to like change their name or go by a different name. More so, I feel like it's up to the teacher what they report. Like, I think fighting or like bullying, all that kind of stuff should be reported to the parents. Grades should be reported to the parents. Well, they're obligated to be right now, but like stuff like that should be reported to the parents. But then there's other stuff that, you know, it's up to the teacher whether they want to report, like name preferences or all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree with both of these two, but there are a couple of things I want to add. One, I think it's not that it is up to the teacher, it should be up to the teacher, because right now it's not up to the teacher whether or not they do or don't report like a name change. And I think, it's a tricky situation to be in. And I don't envy teachers at all for this situation. But I think what it should come down to is the teacher's moral obligation. And like, if there is abuse happening at home, that is something that, yes, the teacher is, you know, legally obligated to report that, and for good reason. But if it is something like maybe suicidal or self-harm thoughts, it could do more harm than good if you report that. But at the same time, if you just don't talk about it, that could be really detrimental. So it's really sort of a case by case basis, I feel like, where it depends. Because I know when I was struggling with mental health, if someone had reported it to my parents, I would have been devastated and embarrassed. And I'm so glad that the teachers that I told didn't, because it would have hurt me. It would have hurt my pride, and also how much they monitored me. But with some other kids, it would have been more hurtful if they hadn't been reported. So I don't know. It really depends. And I think right now the limitations, or not the limitations, the legal obligations that teachers have it's too much. Because school is supposed to be a safe place for kids to be able to experiment and be who they want to be and do what they want to do and be friends with who they want to be friends with. And parents, I don't really think, have the right to know every single thing that their child does, because that's all going to change when they turn 18 and you won't be able to know all that anymore. But there are some things that teachers should report, but not every single thing.
I'd like to say, first of all, we're not saying teachers should be your first option. Please don't do that. Don't put that on them.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Teachers, telling the teacher would be the last option.
Yeah, like tell a counselor or your
Absolutely.
friends first.
And then the teacher's last option would be telling the parents. The teacher should be first with the child, maybe like a one-on-one after school to talk about it. And then you should like refer them to the student counselor or their own counselor. Like, I've had teachers who actually had cards with like the mental help line or the therapist that teacher uses themselves, because teaching is difficult. So the teacher telling the parent would be like the last option. They shouldn't immediately choose that. But they're also, Cassius, you said teachers would be obligated to tell the student their
No.
grades.
That's required. Report cards.
I've never had that though.
Well, you were in a private school.
I wasn't.
You were Dove Science Academy.
Even then, before that, like, never had to.
Well, not yet.
Okay.
Edison has them semesters.
All right, that's fine.
Yeah. Real quick, I just want to say something, because Mason, you mentioned the public service, not this public service, suicide prevention hotline. That is not just if you think you are about to commit suicide. That is also if there is something really wrong. Even if you are not in immediate danger, you can still text or call 988. It is so incredibly helpful. And it is just a resource that can be used. And it's not a shameful thing to do to use it. It is so, so helpful. And like, if anyone watching this thinks that would help you, please contact them. It is so much better than the possible alternative. Okay, PSA.
So, yeah, I think that's a good point that sort of all of you are making, is that topics like suicide and self-harm are very complicated subjects, and there really can't be any overarching law demanding teachers to respond to them in a certain way, because every person with mental health issues is different. Now, I would like to share, I have had the opportunity to talk to a teacher, a friend's parent, who was someone that a lot of these students went to when they said they were self-harming or they were having suicidal thoughts. And he said that he never reported a single one to their parents. He just talked to them. He helped them out. And every single one of them had made a recovery by the time they graduated high school. That is, I think, something that's important. When this teacher was teaching, it was when class sizes were slightly smaller. And I think that's important, that one-on-one, like being able to talk to a teacher and knowing the teacher will have enough time to talk to you is important. Now, let's talk about not just how much monitoring should be done. What does monitoring do? What do you think are some of the psychological effects monitoring can cause?
Lack of trust in parents and lack of parents' trust in you. Because I remember I mentioned that like I have a really trusting relationship with my parents that I'm very, very grateful for. But when they started monitoring me really heavily, the main argument that we got into over that time was my feeling of, you don't trust me. Because like I don't that is something that I was super uncomfortable with, because the idea that the two people who are closest to me in the world and who know the most about me and who have raised me, that they didn't trust me, was really devastating. And I think that's one of the main drawbacks of monitoring, but also the fact that you don't learn how to monitor yourself. If it's only your parents monitoring you, then you don't learn how to self-regulate. And that also goes for like schoolwork. If your parents are telling you every single night, do your homework at this time, then you can't say like later in college, I need to do my homework at this time, because your parents aren't there to tell you anymore. And it's the same like with internet usage. If your parents are constantly telling you, get off your phone or shutting down your phone at a certain time, then later when they take that restriction off, how are you going to know how to shut down your phone? You're going to have to break a habit of, or break a thought of like, oh, well, now I get to be on my phone as much as I want. That's not really a good thing. Yeah, there are so many drawbacks, but those are the main two that I've felt and that have been a problem for me.
I'd say on top of lack of trust, there's also like a feeling of like you can be more anxious to maybe like you'll be more anxious about like what you send to your friends, or like, you know, what you say through text, all that kind of stuff. It's like you'll be more careful, kind of more reserved about what you talk about. And then that can lead into also a sense of like kind of depression, feeling like you can't talk to your friends without your parents knowing exactly what like problems you're going through. If you don't want to necessarily open up to your parents about a certain thing, then like also not being able to open up to your friend over the phone kind of will add on to that, because your parents can see what you're sending and all that kind of stuff. So I think it can lead to psychological effects like anxiety, depression, lack of trust, kind of that general like whole thing where it's, hold on, I lost my train of thought. You can go.
I'm listening. I don't have anything. You're covering all my points.
Okay, yeah. So kind of like anxiety, depression, lack of trust. I think all of those are like some psychological effects that can occur from that.
Okay, to add a facet to that, it's not just parents, it is friends too, because like you'll always be monitored, right? So you always know that like if you say something, your parents will know whether you're lying or not. So you're, how do I say that? You're not forced to trust, but like trust is just never really there. So building trust between friendships, you'll feel like you have to always prove yourself, and that will be very hard to like break that habit of always having to like provide evidence for why you should believe me, or just saying something and knowing that somebody can like take you at your word. It's a entire new experience of like rebuilding that. You have to rebuild self-confidence and like assuredness of yourself. It just damages your child as a whole.
All right. Now, I'd like to take some time to share my viewpoint from sort of an opposing point of view. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the psychological effects of not being monitored. I personally am, my internet usage, my parents know where I am because of, like I said, the Apple phone, or like they said. But other than that, they are not monitoring my internet usage. They are not like placing any special location tracking apps on me. They're not asking my teachers how I'm doing. Well, they are not asking my teachers how I'm doing in school. They're just asking me how I feel like I'm doing. They cannot do any of those things because of medical reasons, and that has not had a negative impact on my life at all. I know, obviously, this is not going to be true for everyone. As a teenager, you're still developing, obviously, you're going to make some stupid decisions sometimes. But I have been able to do completely fine without any extraordinary tracking. I don't have social media. I've never used my real name online or watched pornography or all of these things parents are scared their kids are going to do on the internet. I feel like I have been able to completely avoid those just through self-regulation. And I feel like that is adding on to you guys' point. of it depends on how emotionally mature the child is, I feel like parents have a tendency, because they've known their teenagers since they were very small children, to underestimate how mature they are. And I feel like it's important to recognize when your kid is mature enough to make their own decisions. All right then. Now, for a bit of a heavier topic. Now, in most cases, in a romantic relationship, putting location tracking apps or other things on your partner's devices without their consent is considered domestic abuse. Do you think that there are cases where that is considered child abuse to track a child, or do you think that a parent's right to know what their kid is doing overrides that?
The parents, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, a child tracking a romantic partner is a whole other person. Like, they're their own autonomous. I'm assuming you mean like married relationship, not married, but like adult relationships.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're over 18. They're their own person. They have their own rights. But when you're a child, you're young. You can't make as many like legal decisions on your own. You can't legally change your name. You can't get a tattoo. You can't drink alcohol. All that kind of stuff. You're not like autonomous from your parents. But I mean, if you're just it shouldn't be considered child abuse to track your child. I think that's just child safety.
Do you think that's true to any extent?
No.
The age of okay, to the age of 18, I would say that is the extent of that. At that point is when you have the conversation of whether I can keep this on you while you're still living in my house. And maybe even past that, but not at that point you would switch to a different tracking agency. One that you don't just like look at, but like, okay. One that doesn't report where you are, but that you can know where they are just in case. Because like my sister, she's 25. No, she's 23. And she's in Japan. We still have like her location. Just in case like something happens. We would know. But the age of 18 would be when that would stop and you'd have a conversation just about if I can keep this on you for safety reasons.
I have to say I kind of disagree with you guys. I don't think child abuse is the right word, because abuse is such a strong term to use. But I don't like the idea that like, oh well, it's okay because a child isn't their own person. Like, well, I mean, I think anyone who is alive is in fact their own person. And once you get to a certain point, the more restrictions you put, the more likely that child is to do it. Like, it's kind of like, the grass is greener on the other side. Like, I'm unhappy now, so well, I mean, like, it must be better if I do this. That might not necessarily be the case. And also you have to, there's this expression of, well, not really expression, there's this thing my parents always say to me about how, like, when you get older, the things you can do to damage yourself, they can damage you more and more as you get older. And like at our age, there's drugs, there's alcohol, there's sexual activeness, and all of those things can be abused. So I think it is important to track your child, but those things, while they can be abused, are really tempting. And peer pressure, it's talked about a lot. It is a real thing. And embarrassment, if you don't participate in something, is a real thing. And I think tracking your child and putting set limits on your child is really harmful to their growth as a person. I don't know if it could be classified as abuse, but I think it is something that should be looked about, and that I would love for there to be an actual medical study done on this to see how tracking impacts a child's growth. But that hasn't happened yet, and I think it should. But I don't know. I don't like using the term abuse for it, but I think it's not just a simple yes or no question.
By like autonomous, like their own person, I meant
No,
legally their own person,
I know.
not like
Yeah, no, I know what you meant. No, I know what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah, Cassius is over here like, a child does not have rights.
No rights.
Can't cut my own crust off yet. I'm sorry, guys. I have to eat it.
That is so sad for you. But that is some very good points, Margaret. I think I'd also like to say that I have known people like whose I would say that there is a certain point where it is abuse, because I have known people whose parents would like use location tracking apps to stop them from going to friends' houses that they didn't approve of. And what these parents didn't approve of was anyone who wasn't like insanely religious, or like deliberately made their child feel paranoid because they thought that would make them behave better. Like, I feel like at that point that is emotional abuse.
Yeah, I think there are definitely some things that you can do when it turns into emotional abuse, like paranoia, like saying like, oh, well, I'm always watching you, so you can't do anything wrong. And then especially if you don't specify what exactly is wrong, like that is, I think, borderline abusive, because it's causing your child to constantly be second guessing, like, oh, am I messing up? Oh, am I doing something wrong? Am I going to be punished? And that is a problem. It's not all bad, but like as I was saying, like I think it's a very tricky subject.
Yeah, you asked like right at the end of my thing, you said to any extent, and I said no. And that's the extent that I was talking about. If the parents are, I feel like having like tracking, knowing where your kids are to a certain extent is responsible parenting, but overdoing it or like over restricting their ability to go to places starts to get to a point where it is more like emotional abuse, or like you're not allowed out of the house. You're going to be locked in your room for like a year straight and you can't do anything. So it's like, yeah, to any extent, no, but to like a reasonable extent, I'd say it's more just like responsibility. It's more just,
So what you're saying is sort of like it doesn't really matter like what data they have, it's how you're using it. Like, are you using it to help your child, or are you using it to hurt your child?
yeah, kind of.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then, all right. Sorry, just a second. Cut this part out. I need to find the exit.
You're all good.
Okay. I'd like to thank our panelists, Margaret, Cassius, and Mason, for partner organization, All Souls Youth, and the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies and Tri-City Collective for making Teen Talk possible. Thank you for joining us today in person or on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to the Tri-City Collective YouTube channel and stay tuned for our next youth partner organization, OCCJ, who will be hosting a very special Teen Talk in December. Thanks. I'm Adelaide, and this has been Teen Talk.